Okay, this video will be about the lymphatic system and the immune system. And many of the cells from the immune system give rise from cells from the lymphatic system. A lot of what we'll talk about today in the lymphatic system will be similar to some of the topics that we covered in the cardiovascular system, because the lymphatic system is very closely related, closely follows blood vessels. So some of this will look familiar. So the lymphatic system, it is cells and chemicals that travel in lymphatic vessels, and it's a network of vessels that assist in circulating fluids. So either getting fluids to places or filtering out things that we need to remove. It's closely associated with the cardiovascular system. It kind of follows along with arteries and veins and capillaries, and it transports excess fluid away from interstitial spaces. Interstitial means like between things, so between other major structures. It transfers fluids to the bloodstream. It transports fats to the bloodstream, and it helps defend the body against diseases. So it's the major way that antibodies get to different places, and we're going to see more about that. Okay, so this is an overview of our lymphatic system. So here you see the heart, and then without showing the pulmonary and the systemic capillary systems, this is just showing the systemic cardiovascular system. And you can see that kind of alongside these blood vessels, you'll see these lymph vessels. And lymph vessels are kind of studded with these lymph nodes, and we're going to see how these work together. So this is showing kind of a zoomed in place between a artery that is oxygen rich and a vein that is oxygen poor. And then in between those two, we have these capillaries where the gas exchange happens, where the carbon dioxide is released and the oxygen is picked up. And then all in between there, we're going to see these lymphatic capillaries. And these lymphatic capillaries are right next to the blood vessels so that there can be exchange of fluids. So the lymphatic vessels are thinner than those of veins. And remember, veins are thinner than arteries. So they're the thinnest of the vessels. And they're composed of 3 layers, an outer, middle, and an inner. So connective tissue is on the outside, smooth muscle is on the middle, and then the endothelial lining is the inner. So larger vessels lead to lymph nodes and then to lymphatic trunks. So this is what that looks like. So throughout our body, we have various regions that have a higher concentration of lymph nodes, and then those drain into trunks. So it says the trunks drain lymph from the lymphatic vessels. They're named for the region that they serve, such as lumbar, intestinal, intercostal, bronchiomediastinal, subclavian, and jugular. So kind of all around the body, you have these lymphatic trunks that drain from the lymph nodes. So this is showing here the area that is being drained by this right lymphatic duct. So this right lymphatic duct, the lymph nodes in the trunk, and the lymphatic vessels. So different areas of the body will drain into different ducts or trunks. You probably have felt lymph nodes before when they're swollen. That's one of the first things they do when you go to the doctors. They feel for your lymph nodes. A swollen lymph node indicates that you might have an active infection and your lymph nodes are working to make some of those immune cells. So you see these lymph nodes kind of follow blood vessels. So we see these words again, afferent and efferent. Remember that afferent means into and efferent means out of. So this is showing the path of the flow of the fluid. So you have a lymphatic capillary, and an afferent lymphatic vessel means we're flowing into, so we're flowing into a lymph node. And then out of the lymph node, it would be efferent lymphatic vessel. So afferent goes into the lymph node, efferent comes out of the lymph node. Once it comes out of the lymph node, it would find the nearest lymphatic trunk, and then to a collecting duct, and then to the subclavian vein. So what is lymph? So lymph is essentially tissue fluid that has entered the lymphatic capillary. So lymph formation depends on tissue fluid formation. So remember when we talked about blood, and we had that picture where we took a sample of blood and we spun it down and separated it. Most of it was blood plasma. So there's not a lot of differences between lymph and plasma. They carry small molecules, they have ions and electrolytes and waste and nutrients. So just really the location of it is where what defines the name of it. So it's very similar to plasma, contains water, dissolved substances, that sort of stuff. So filtration from the plasma normally exceeds reabsorption, leading to the net formation of tissue fluid, which means if you are making more fluid than you are using or resorbing, you're going to ultimately have more fluid and swelling. And the term for this is edema. So if you have an accumulation of excess tissue or fluid, this is called edema. So this is due to usually maybe some sort of problem with the lymphatic system, or an overworking of lymph nodes, or some sort of infection or circulatory problem. So the function of lymph is to deliver fats to the bloodstream, to collect excess liquid, to deliver excess fluids to the bloodstream, and then collect foreign particles to deliver foreign particles to the lymph nodes. So it's going around the body, it's collecting all of these foreign particles. And when we talk about the immune system later, we're going to see that one of the major jobs is it brings these foreign particles to the lymph nodes. And at the lymph nodes are a lot of the immune cells. And then the immune cells will look at these foreign particles and say, are these antigens? Are these something that I need to be mounting an immune response against to try to clear? So lymph moves with what's called hydrostatic pressure, and kind of like veins that aren't being pumped so much by the heart. The heart really pumps the blood through the arteries, and then that subsequently will push things through the veins. But a lot of skeletal muscles, respiratory muscles, and then larger smooth muscles around some of those larger lymphatic vessels is what helps move the fluid through the lymphatic system. And there are valves in the lymphatic vessels similar to the valves that are in veins to prevent backflow, to keep the lymph moving. Here's a dissection showing a lymph node, showing the lymphatic vessels. You'll see these in your lab and identify them. But again, usually if there's something interfering with the processes involved in the lymphatic system, it will result in fluid not being removed like it should, and that will result in edema or swelling. Sorry. Okay, so let's talk about lymph nodes. So lymph nodes or lymph glands, same thing, but we typically call them nodes, are located along the lymphatic pathway, and they contain lymphocytes and macrophages. So remember, these are two of the immune cells. If you've taken microbiology, we will have talked about these a lot. If not, we're going to talk about the immune cells here as well. So this is the structure of a lymph node. Again, over and over, you're going to see afferent versus efferent. So coming into the lymph node would be the afferent lymphatic vessels, and leaving the lymph node would be the efferent lymphatic vessels. So this would be brought to the lymph node. And you can see that these are associated with cardiovascular vessels. You see an artery and a vein. And here we have macrophages, we have T cells, we have B cells. So a lot of the precursors to different types of immune cells are found here in the lymph nodes. So fluid and particles are being collected all throughout your body and brought to your lymph nodes for then your lymph nodes to decide, is this something that we need an immune response against? Here's another picture just showing a cross section looking at the germinal layer and the capsule here. Again, when you are labeling these, you'll be looking for the afferent and the efferent vessels and the other structures. So lymph nodes are all over. Majorly, you'll find them in these areas. So there's the cervical region. This is usually what they're feeling for at the doctor's office. If you have an infection, they'll see if your lymph nodes are swollen, and that's usually an indicator of an active infection that you are fighting. There's axillary, supratrochlear, all over. These are the major locations of the lymph nodes. So lymph nodes have two primary functions: to filter out harmful particles from the lymph, and then to activate immune surveillance by the macrophages and the lymphocytes. And along with red bone marrow, the lymphs are the center for lymphocyte production. So there's the lymph nodes, and then there's two other major organs in the lymphatic system, and that is the thymus and the spleen. So the thymus, this is one of the glands we talked about back in the endocrine system. The thymus is a gland here, and it is larger in infancy and puberty, and then it shrinks in adults. It's replaced by fat and connective tissue in the elderly, and this is what houses lymphocytes. It secretes proteins, hormones called thymosins, which stimulate the maturation of T lymphocytes. So T cells are part of the immune system, and we're going to see what they do. But the hormone that matures T cells comes from the thymus. Okay, here's the thymus here. You see the thyroid, the parathyroid would be there, the thymus, the lungs, the diaphragm. This is where it's located. The other primary lymphatic organ is the spleen. This is the largest of the lymphatic organs. It's located in the upper left quadrant of the abdomen. It has sinuses that are filled with blood. There's two major tissue types. There's white pulp lymphocytes and red pulp, which has red blood cells, lymphocytes, and macrophages. And the major job of the spleen is to filter blood. So these are the major organs of the lymphatic system. So there's three: lymph nodes, thymus, and spleen, and this kind of summarizes what we've said previously. Okay, so the way that the body defends against infection is with the immune system, and the immune system identifies anything that is a pathogen, and a pathogen is anything that is non-self presenting what's called an antigen. The antigen is the either protein or some sort of something on the outside of this pathogen that our cells are identifying as not self. So it could be a bacteria, it could be all kinds of different things. But there's two ways that our immune system can react. That we have what are called innate defenses. Innate you can kind of think of as like automatic, and these are things that you're born with. And then there's the adaptive defenses, and these are sometimes called acquired immunity that you acquire over time. These are more specific, and these are carried out by lymphocytes. So here are some types of innate defenses. In microbiology, we spend a lot more time talking about the specifics of these. I'm going to just go through and give you some examples, and we'll get into this more later. So there's species resistance. So this would be an example of a bacteria or virus or something that causes disease in some species, but not others. So a good example of this is dogs or cats that you have vaccinated for specific viruses that we are not susceptible to. So parvovirus, for example, is a vaccination that your animals will get, but that's not a virus that affects our cells. Mechanical barriers. So this is kind of our first line of defense, our skin, our mucous membranes. The acidic and dry environment of the barriers will help protect against pathogens. We also have chemical barriers, and then we have natural killer cells. These are lymphocytes that secrete what are called perforins, and these perforins will kind of inject they will reproduce and release viral particles to kind of alert the cells around it of this virus, and that original cell will die, but the cells around it will then be protected because they will have the information and know that that virus is there. Inflammation is an innate response. We know that inflammation causes vasodilation, which means there's an increase of blood flow. So this brings all of the things that are in the blood to that area to help prevent the spread of the infection. Phagocytosis is a process that some immune cells have. Phago means eating, and cytosis means cell. So these are cells that literally go around and find things that are antigens and eat them and destroy them. They secrete enzymes that will break apart the cell wall of whatever the pathogen is. And then fever is another good example of an innate, non-specific immune defense. Increases your body temperature, and oftentimes pathogens like bacteria are very susceptible to changes in temperature. It will change their enzyme activity, and oftentimes will kill a bacteria just by increasing your body temperature a few degrees. So a fever is a good thing. It's your body's first line of defense. Obviously, if the fever reaches a certain threshold, then it can start damaging you too. But when you get a fever, it's your body trying to fight off whatever pathogen that it's experienced. So these next few slides are going to just go through what was in that chart. So species resistance, mechanical barriers, we've covered all of these already. Inflammation, phagocytosis, fever. Okay, so let's talk about adaptive immunity. So adaptive immunity, this is sometimes called the third line of defense. So we have physical barriers, we have innate immunity, and then we have adaptive immunity. So sometimes this is called learned immunity or acquired immunity. And this is based on the ability for molecules to distinguish self from non-self. And antigens are presented on these molecules that are non-self, and then our immune system recognizes them as a threat and will kill them. So the process of this is that a pathogen would attempt to gain entrance into the body. The first line of defense, the mechanical barrier, skin or mucous membranes. If the pathogen is able to get through that, then the second line of defense, this would be the innate immunity. And the third line of defense would be now this adaptive immunity. So that's what we're going to talk about now. So let's just define antigens. We've been talking about it for a little bit, but antigens can be proteins, polysaccharides, glycoproteins, or glycolipids. Usually it's just some sort of tag on the outside of the cell that our immune system will recognize as not self. So all of our own cells in our body have self particles on the outside. So our immune system knows these are cells that belong here. These are not a threat or disease causing antigens. So pathogens are something that present an antigen. So let's talk about this cell from the immune system that is going to fight these pathogens, the lymphocyte. So we talked about these a little bit when we talked about the blood and saw that stem cells in the blood, in the red bone marrow, can give rise to a few different types of cells. And we talked about how they could make red blood cells, white blood cells, and another type of cell that they can make are lymphocytes. So lymphocytes are made in the stem cells of the red bone marrow. Some lymphocytes go to the thymus to become T cells. So some go to the thymus to become a special type of immune cell. Some go to a lymph node, and both T and B cells are transported through the blood. So remember, it goes to a lymph node, and now from a lymph node, it can travel through those lymphatic vessels that are next to all of the veins and arteries. So then it can access wherever the infection is. Okay, so T cells. So we said the T cells get activated in the thymus, and a lymphocyte must be activated before it can respond to an antigen. So these types of cells have to learn or look for the types of pathogens, antigens that they're trying to fight against. So T cell activation requires antigen presenting cell. So this is a cell that kind of shows it what to look for on its surface. And this requires different parts that we're not going to talk a lot about, the MHC complex, HLA, basically just to recognize itself, recognize it from self cells. T cells, what are special about T cells is they can produce what are called cytokines, and these cytokines can help destroy these pathogenic cells. There's a few different types of T cells. There's what are called helper T cells, cytotoxic T cells, and memory T cells, and all of these are important in killing pathogens. We're not going to talk a lot about cytokines. These are some different types of cytokines, and they are where they're produced. Interferons, these are cytokines that block viral replication. Interleukins control lymphocyte differentiation and proliferation, so making of these immune cells when there's a threat. And then TNF, or tumor necrosis factor, this is important in stopping the growth of tumors. So B cells are another type of immune cell. We have T cells and B cells, and T cells are the cells that make antibodies or immunoglobulins. So B cells can be activated when the antigen fits the shape of the receptor. So the antigen and the antibody fit together in a very specific, like, puzzle piece, and that's how they recognize each other. So most B cells require activation by T cells, but some B cells are what are called memory B cells. And they secrete what are called antibodies. Another word for antibodies are immunoglobulins. And we talked about this a little bit when we talked about the blood. We said that the gamma globulins are these immunoglobulins. So this is a picture kind of showing the maturation of these different types of cells, where they come from, how they're activated. You'll look at this a little bit more during lab, so feel free to pause this and look at this in more detail if you want to. Here's another picture showing the recognition of the antigen by the antibody. So this is the antibody. They're calling the antibody here the antigen receptor, but this little Y-shaped thing here, this is a picture of an antibody. In this case, this is an IgG antibody, and we'll look at some of these in more detail. But basically what this does is the antibody tells the immune system, we know what this antigen is, we've seen it before, and we know how to kill it. And that's what happens when we have antibodies. It is kind of like a boost to our immune system that we know how to find these pathogens and for our immune system to take care of them. This just summarizes what we just talked about B cells and T cells and their similarities and differences. Feel free to pause here if you want to read this. Okay, so here are antibodies. So antibodies are immunoglobulins. They are gamma globulins. They're found in the blood plasma, but they can travel through the lymph system. There's where those capillaries cross over. It can go back and forth from the blood to the lymph, and so on. So this is the shape. This is a cartoon of what the protein structure looks like. It's a protein. It's a globular protein that's got 4 pieces that are held together. These little S's here represent disulfide bonds. If you remember back from chemistry, there's amino acids called cysteine, and cysteine have that thiol group, that SH, and then when they find each other, they can make this disulfide bond, this covalent interaction to hold this protein in this site. So there's different regions of this antibody, and essentially up here where it says this antigen binding site, another word for this is called the epitope, and this is the variable region, meaning this part right here where it's going to bind to the pathogen, to the antigen, is specific to the antigen. So all the rest of the antibody, the constant regions can all be the same, but these variable regions are specific to one specific antigen. So every single antibody is specific to every single antigen. This is just showing some other types of antibodies. IgG is by far the most common, but there are 4 other types of antibodies you can stop here and read about. And then this is showing the actions of antibodies. And we'll look at this a little more closely in the lab when we see some of the antibodies binding with pathogens. So this is a graph that shows the time of onset exposure to a pathogen and what happens if you have been exposed already and have made antibodies against it. So this is showing like if you were exposed to a pathogen, a bacteria or a virus that had a protein on it, and you were first exposed to it, and it might take you 20-25 days to really have a full antibody make enough antibodies to maybe fight off whatever this infection is. The next time you're exposed to that same antigen, because you've seen it before and you already have these antibodies circulating, you can start making more of those antibodies right away. So this is an example of adapted immunity, where you now have a boosted immune response to something that you've already seen before. This is showing the different types of immunity, active versus passive. So we have naturally acquired active immunity. This would be like you got sick. Naturally, you were exposed to some pathogen and then your body made antibodies against it, and now you have an immune response with antibodies that are ready made. The next one would be artificially acquired active immunity. So this would be like a vaccine. So a vaccine is basically exposing you to something that you haven't been exposed to yet. So when you get the flu shot in the fall, you are getting a weakened or dead pathogen, so that when you get the flu in the winter, your body has seen those antigens before and it is ready to fight it off quickly. So maybe you get a much lesser version of the flu, or maybe you don't even have any symptoms. You don't even know that you have it. Artificially acquired passive immunity. This would be like an injection of antibodies. This is very rare, uncommon. This is not like a vaccine. This isn't something that is typically done. And then naturally acquired passive immunity. This would be like antibodies being passed from mother to fetus during pregnancy. Allergic reactions are from our immune system. And it's an immediate, there's 4 different types of allergic reactions. You can pause here to look at the differences between them, but it's basically a situation where your body is mistakenly, well, it's recognizing something as an antigen, and maybe it shouldn't. So pollen, for example, some people recognize pollen as an antigen and have an allergic reaction to it. There also can be autoimmune diseases sometimes. We'll talk about those later. So here's the 4 different types of allergic reactions. This is just showing, starting here, the allergen, which is an antigen, so that's binding here, and then it is stimulating, it's mounting this immune response. Usually there's a lot of histamine released, which results in red, runny, itchy eyes, that sort of stuff, which is common with an allergic reaction. Another thing to talk about in the immune system is transplantation and tissue rejection. If someone was to have a organ transplant or some sort of tissue transplant, there needs to be a lot of precautions and steps taken to make sure that the host and the donor have similar antigens, that they have, or that there is a lot of, that the patient receiving the organ is on some immunosuppressant drugs so that it can accept a donor tissue. Because remember, your immune system is only recognizing your own cells as self and would mount an immune response to any other tissue or organs. So this is looking at the different types of transplants. Feel free to pause here and read through this. The last thing we'll talk about with the immune system is autoimmunity. So autoimmune diseases are when your body is recognizing some part of yourself as something to stimulate an immune response and either produce antibodies, autoantibodies, or cytotoxic T cells that will attack your own body's tissue and organs. So there's many different types of these types of diseases. Feel free to pause here and read more. The immune system changes throughout our lifespan. It declines with the decline of our thymus gland. So remember at the beginning we said the thymus is bigger as an infant, and then as we grow to an adult it is smaller, and then as we continue to age the thymus gets weaker and weaker and weaker. So that also impacts our overall immunity. Also during, with aging and continuous DNA replication for new cells, there's a higher risk of cancer, also a higher risk of infection. Antibody response to antigens may get slower. Also antibody production can change. And sometimes there are some interventions that are available for younger patients that elderly patients may not be a candidate for. So this kind of wraps up our conversation on the lymphatic system and the immune system. And you'll use this information to supplement what you will talk about in lab. Let me know if you have any questions.